Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Republic of Tea's Plum Pudding Black Tea, which is part of the Downton Abbey line, which I thought would be appropriate as well. I mean, I like the tea, all well and good. But because I finally saw a movie in a theater in the month of May, which I haven't done in years, well before the COVID restrictions. And yeah, it was Downton Abbey, in case you were wondering. And it was good. I had a fun time doing that. So I thought that was appropriate because I'm talking about the month of May. I'm mostly talking about the books I finished. So this is a wrap-up regarding those books. But I'm only going to talk about 4 books because I talked enough, I think, about the Alison Weir novel about Elizabeth of York, and it was good. So I've said enough about that. And so I'm just put a little time toward these 4 books, all of which I liked in various degrees, none of which I think blew me away to the point that they were going to be my top 10 of the year or anything like that. But I think that's okay. Because it was still, to me, a pretty successful reading month in terms of liking what I read. I didn't complete a lot of books. I started so many and didn't complete. And I have so many things to finish, and that's a story for another time or for the last video. But one of the things that kind of held me up from reading as much as I intended to is not a bad thing at all. I had vacation time that I used as a sort of staycation with a friend who was visiting. So we went around and saw all kinds of fun things. Well, mostly fun things. Historical interest, actually, because we're both really into history and New York history. And also we went to other places, bookshops, you know, different restaurants that we liked and everything. We had a really good time. But as happens when I spend vacation with someone else, whether I go away or not, I don't have as much time or energy to read. So it backed me up a little bit, and that's okay. You know, I mean, sometimes you just really have to spend time with people that you care about. So no regrets, but so that gives me time to talk about the 4 books that I finished. The only thing that I really, really wish I would have done was finish a book that is in the nature writing category, because the past couple of years I was very much participating in the Springathon challenge, and I loved it. But this month, even though I started things that were nature related, I didn't finish anything, and I didn't make a lot of progress. So a little regretful, but I think I'll be okay. So if I'm not, besides the Alison Weir book, if I'm not talking about a book today, it's because I just didn't finish it. You'll probably hear about it later, hopefully. So there's 2 mysteries that I finished, and both were pretty good. The first one was a Dorothy L. Sayers book, the Lord Peter Wimsey mystery, and that is Strong Poison. It was my May of the Moderns pick, or one of them, the one that I finished. And I've been reading them out of order, intentionally, because I started reading the series a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to get to Gaudy Night, because I started that one years ago, and I just really wanted to read it. And I did last year, really liked it, which of course meant that I found out a lot of things about the previous books, but I was willing to let that happen. Sometimes you just do. But I also read a book in April that gave away a major spoiler for Strong Poison, which I'm still kind of unhappy about, because even though the book itself was pretty good, I don't like that. When you're writing books, when you're talking about books, even if it's a book that's been out for a long time, don't give away the ending. Don't give away what happened. But anyway, I mean, maybe some obvious ones, like, you know, what happened in the end of Romeo and Juliet or something. I don't know. Or like Jane Eyre. Anyway, but I digress, as I do. So in this case, we are introduced to Harriet Vane, who I was reading about in Gaudy Night. She was the main character there. But she is the love interest as the series progresses for Lord Peter. And he, in case you haven't heard or read about any of these books, I know they're pretty well known, but you can't know everything. He is a rather well-off man in London who collects books and things, and he's very books and other items, and related to literature. Really, he's got the money for it, and it's interesting if you like books. So that's kind of cool. But he's also very smart, so he helps investigate certain mysteries, usually murders. And in this case, he was not called on to investigate this. He just became interested in this trial for Harriet Vane for murder of her fiance, I think it's her fiance, who was poisoned by arsenic. Now, Harriet is a murder mystery writer, and she has written about arsenic before, so she knows a thing or two. So she is being tried for murder, and Lord Peter, I think partially because he finds himself interested in her, but also just because he is interested in getting to the truth. He realizes something's off, that she didn't do it, and so he takes it upon himself really to investigate. And in this story, it's a little less of a whodunit than a, well, who didn't do it and how was it done. That's the difficulty. So he uses things at his disposal. Oh, the English language. Anyway, mainly it's like when you read Sherlock Holmes and he has the Baker Street irregulars, the little kids that run around the city and can get into places that no one else can. He uses a group of women, Lord Peter, who are in a lot of mostly professional capacities, like secretary, stuff like that, who can get into offices and other places that maybe he couldn't, so to spy for him, really, to find out information, to get documents for him. And this is a really great case of him doing that. And there's a couple of women that are used in this particular case, and which was pretty fun. Only thing I wasn't really keen on was there was a lot of use of, like, what do they call it, table rapping or something. It's like a form of spiritism, trying to contact the dead. I'm really not into any of that. I know Agatha Christie uses some of that too, but it is kind of used in a way that does further the plot very well, finds out information very well, but I'm just not big on it. And just, to me, it went on a little bit too long. But otherwise, it was a fun, slightly witty story. It always has, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one who says this, these mysteries always feel a little bit like the Jeeves and Wooster series, except less comic. And Jeeves is actually referred to in this book, so obviously Dorothy Sayers was, I guess, aware of this. Because Lord Peter uses his butler a lot to help him in so many ways. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty good book. I can't tell you yet which is my favorite of the Lord Peter Whimsy novels, but we'll get there eventually. And speaking of reading books out of order, I've been having this problem lately with reading books, finding books usually in the library. And I see it and I get excited and I check it out, and then I realize, ooh, I read the wrong order. Sometimes it's just one book out of order. Like I read the first two books and then I somehow skipped to the fourth one. Something like that, which is annoying because you can still find out things in that book that you didn't expect to because you didn't read the previous book. But usually I can work with that. But in this case, I don't know what happened to me. I was in the new release area of one of the libraries that I go to, and I guess returned some books. And I thought, oh, I'll have a look around because I need more books to check out. And I saw the title, Jane Austen's Lost Letters, and anything Jane Austen, I immediately, get excited about. This is by Jane K. Cleland. Now, good enough, but how did I miss this? A Josie Prescott Antiques Mystery. So obviously this is a series. The description in here, right on top, in bold, says, Jane K. Cleland returns with Jane Austen's Lost Letters, the 14th installment in the beloved Josie Prescott Antique series. 14th. I mean, so yeah, I did not realize it until I was at the very end of the book. I don't know why. My reading comprehension, I don't know. Oops. Anyway, And yet it was a pretty good book. It was about, well, Josie has her own television show in which they appraise antiques, and they bring on experts to talk about certain things, old letters, old objects, and where they're from, are they real, are they legit, or are they forgeries, that sort of thing. And there is already one plot, actually that is the main murder plot. There are people who appear on her television show and some are rivals, so already that leads you to certain suspicions. But some of the people that are on her program end up dead, obviously murdered. And so that is not only bad for, finishing up making the TV show, which of course is the least of the problems, but also did it have anything to do with what they were talking about? So Josie helps to investigate this, and actually the B plot is the Jane Austen's lost letters, although it is in a way connected with the whole murder, in a way. A mysterious woman, and a slightly older woman, shows up with a box that has other items too, but also has these 2 letters that look to be written by Jane Austen. And then this woman just disappears without a trace, with no contact information. And this box is from Josie's father, who had died over 20 years ago in the World Trade Center. So, of course, anything you get from anyone you love that died is a big deal. But of course, in this case, it was such an abrupt, death that she probably always has had to deal with the whole feeling of needing closure. But this box and this woman showing up leads to all kinds of questions. Of course, are these real letters from Jane Austen? Because on a professional level, that is a massive deal if they're real, because Jane Austen surviving letters are fewer than what we know of that she wrote. So many were destroyed after she died that anything that is found that is written by Jane Austen at all, or anyone really related to her, is massive. So she needs to authenticate this. But also she wants to find out, who was this mysterious woman who knew her father? And why does she not want to know her? So there's a lot of different mysteries involved in this story, and it was good. I would say it's a pretty cover. And there are cats. There are at least 2 cats in here, which I love, some fluffy kitties. But the problem was that I came onto it in the 14th book. So there are a lot of characters that are introduced that you could just tell already have a settled relationship. So they're not introduced so much in the story. And there's mentions of them, so I guess you could catch up. Like if you've been reading a series, but you haven't read one in like a year, you may have forgotten how this person knows each other, this other person. And so that's okay, but it was just, yeah, completely my fault. But it felt weird, for instance, that there is a police officer that shows up that is, has a lot of influence, and he doesn't seem to have a problem with Josie being part of the investigation in ways that most police officers would say, or detectives would say, hey, no, keep away. So obviously they have a rapport. So how did that happen? I know I could tell there are more than one ways that must have happened, but yeah. So I am curious. Maybe one day I'll read the rest of them, because it is up my alley. These antiques. There's a lot here about letters and handwriting, and I've always found that interesting. Of course, I'm not an expert, but even just talking about old ink and paper, it's pretty cool. So I liked it, but totally my fault. It was just good, Anyway, and then I read a book that I've been meaning to read for a while called Dear Mrs. Byrd by A.J. Pierce, which I found out actually is, well, thankfully, the first of what looks to be a series. So I've already taken out the second book and started it a little bit, and it looks to be pretty good. So the fact that I did take out the second one means that I like this first one well enough. And so this is a Blitz era World War II novel, and Emmeline Lake, or Emmy, is the main character. She wants to be a war correspondent, a lady war correspondent. She lives with her friend Bunty and in London, and of course they both try to get involved in the war effort. That's so she's already quite busy, but she finds an opening for a position that she thinks will further her goals. But then she finds out that it's a magazine that is part of another journal that that she thought she was getting into. That is an advice column, which, you know, okay, fine. But then she realizes that not only is it an advice column, but the person, Mrs. Byrd, who is in charge of it, is very selective about what she will answer. And a lot of the people writing in have genuine concerns that maybe aren't always related to the war or something, but Mrs. Byrd keeps rejecting them for anything related to relationships. It's almost like how could anyone not want to respond to these requests? So that's what Emmy thinks. She doesn't understand that. So she starts surreptitiously answering some of these letters. So of course this is not something she should be doing. And so there's a whole story about how she kind of tries to do this and how other people react if and when they find out. And then of course there are relationship stories in here. Both she and her friend have fiancés that they're quite close to, and what develops there. So it was a fun story. It was mostly an entertaining story, but of course it had some sad, disastrous moments, not just in her job, but also in her life, because like I said, it's the Blitz and things happened. Very destructive times, quite frightening. I don't know how, you know, but people got through it. But there were some really humorous lines where I actually did, I don't know about laughed out loud, but I did chuckle a little bit. And it was, I believe it was a really, I don't like to say fun, but a good historical novel. Like I said, I'm not usually drawn too much to World War II era novels. I do read them, but it's not my favorite time to read about. But this was definitely a good one, and I would recommend it. I would say it's a good, quick, enjoyable read, and if this is your kind of book, then yes, a definite 4-star. Like I said, it didn't blow me away, but I do want to read the next one just because I want to see what happens next. Some things that happen are a little bit unlikely and coincidental, but what book doesn't have that? So last, but I was gonna say not least, but in my star rating system, this probably did get the fewest amount of stars, which is a shame because this is a writer that I really like. But this is Peter Ackroyd's Innovation, the nonfiction book that I read and finished. It's The History of England, Volume 6. This is one that I've actually been reading out of order. I read the Tudor book, and then I read the Foundation, which was the first one. So I have the rest. I think I have the rest of the series, and I want to read them. But I saw this coming out, and I'm like, oh, it's new. This looks interesting, and it covered the entire 20th century in England. And I thought, okay, I could get behind this. And it was good in the chapters that were good, if that makes sense. So when it would get on a subject that I found interesting, sometimes, yes, even World War II or World War I related, sometimes even some economic things, and just household living, entertainment. It could be quite interesting and important and well written. But there were so many chapters about prime ministers and, you know, the government, which isn't a bad thing per se, but it was, for me, a bit of a snooze fest. So, and also about economics, which is important, but those chapters for me dragged to the point that it took me months and months to read this book. So I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. In another mood, if they had this in Goodreads, I would give it 3.5 stars. It was not, I just don't think it was his best book. It wasn't horrific, but, and also the cover makes 0 sense because the cover has the Queen, which, I mean, she's definitely mentioned, the royal family's mentioned a number of times in the book, but it's really not mainly a book about the monarchy, which is fine because I didn't actually expect it to be. But I don't know why this cover, I kind of think it should have had, I don't know, like maybe her and Churchill or something on the front, because he was a pretty big deal for the first half of the 20th century, I guess. I don't know. So I don't know if I can recommend it. Not that it was a horrible book, but it was just okay. And there have to be other books about that same subject that are better. I did start a while back the book by A.N. I think Wilson, After the Victorians, which covers a similar time period. And I haven't gotten very far in that one either because it's not extremely interesting. But there's so much that happened in just England itself during this time period that is really interesting. I do think there has to be some better book about this. I'm sure I've read a number of books about this time period, just not that covers the whole century. Maybe that's just not for me, just something that covers 100 years. At least not this time period. I don't know, because the Tudor time period was pretty interesting to me. Anyway, that was my reading for the month of May. Good, not necessarily great. Let's hope June will be better. And I wouldn't call myself in a slump. It was a bit slumpier than I would have liked. So I am still very avidly reading right now, and let's hope that that continues. So that's all for now. If you'd like to in your comments, please mention anything that you particularly enjoyed in May. And if you've read any of these books and have similar or differing opinions, please let me know. And that is all for now. This is Catherine at at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and bookville day. Bye.